Yara sat in the boardroom, the temperature seemingly dropping 10 degrees as Marcus, the CEO of Sterling Partners, slid the compensation sheet across the polished mahogany table. She was 35, a senior strategist who had spent the last 7 years turning the firm's bleeding accounts into cornerstones of their annual revenue. She didn't have the corner office with the sweeping views of the Chicago skyline, nor did she engage in the aggressive, backslapping self-promotion that characterized the executive floor. Instead, Yara was the firm's quiet, ruthless architect. Whenever a massive account like Apex Global, which constituted nearly 30% of Sterling's quarterly billing, threatened to pull their contract, it always shall. The directive from the top was always identical: put Yara on it immediately. For the past 8 weeks, Yara had lived on black coffee, sparse sleep, and pure adrenaline. She had untangled a horrific logistical nightmare created by the sales team's overpromising, rebuilt the Apex relationship from the ground up by flying out to their headquarters twice, and secured a 3-year renewal that effectively saved Sterling's fiscal year by every metric on the internal performance matrix. She was slated for the maximum tier bonus. Yet, the number printed on the sheet before her was exactly 40% of what she had rightfully earned. I know it's lower than the algorithmic projection, Yara, Marcus said, leaning back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He spoke with the smooth, practiced cadence of a man who believed his own PR and had never been punched in the mouth. But we are in a transitional phase as a company. We're restructuring the bonus pool to prioritize leadership vision and enterprise-wide agility over ground-level execution. Yara looked at the paper, then up at Marcus, the CFO, David, and the head of HR. Sarah sat silently beside him, suddenly finding their cuticles fascinating or staring intensely at their tablets. Nobody made eye contact with her. The silence in the room was heavy, toxic. The metrics were clear at the start of the quarter. Marcus, Yara said, her voice completely even, betraying none of the absolute fire igniting in her chest. The Apex renewal exceeded the targeted revenue by $2 million. Are the baseline numbers in dispute? The numbers are fine, Marcus replied, offering a patronizing, tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. But at Sterling, we value systemic team effort. You're a single woman, Yara. You don't have a family to feed, no dependents dragging down your overhead, no mortgage in the suburbs to worry about. You have the luxury of immense job security in a historically tough market. This adjustment reflects a discretionary reallocation for the broader good of the executive team who charted the strategic course. He was telling her explicitly to her face that her grueling hard work was funding the executive's massive bonuses simply because they assumed she didn't have the leverage, the dependence, or the personal desperation to fight back. Yara didn't scream. She didn't slam her fist on the table or threaten to call a lawyer. She picked up the heavy Sterling silver pen provided, signed the acknowledgement line with fluid, unbothered grace, and stood up, smoothing her skirt. Understood, she said softly. Glad we're on the same page. Marcus chuckled, already turning his attention to his phone, dismissing her entirely. Yara walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing sharply down the long, glass-lined hallway. She was not on the same page. She was closing the book entirely. The hallway felt impossibly long as Yara walked past the framed corporate mission statements, words like integrity and partnership that now felt like cruel jokes, and the logos of clients she had personally retained. The anger inside her was not hot and chaotic. It was cold, precise, and absolute. For 7 years, she had genuinely believed that excellence was a shield. She thought that if she became indispensable, the recognition, the promotions, and the compensation would naturally follow in a meritocracy. Marcus had just taught her a brutal, unforgettable lesson in corporate America. Indispensability without formal authority is just high-functioning exploitation. She stopped in front of the executive elevator, pressing the down button. As the digital numbers counted down slowly from 40, she pulled out her phone. 6 months ago, Elias Vance, the CEO of Vanguard Consulting, Sterling's most aggressive and strategic competitor, had invited her to an unassuming breakfast downtown. Elias was the complete antithesis of Marcus. He didn't speak in buzzwords or corporate jargon. He had simply handed her a napkin with a massive salary number written on it and a title Director of Strategic Operations. Yara had declined at the time, citing a misguided loyalty to the firm she had helped build. Elias had smiled knowingly, paid the bill, and told her that loyalty was a two-way street, and when she finally realized she was driving the wrong way, she should call him, standing in the fluorescent glow of the elevator bay. Yara opened her encrypted messaging app. She found Elias's contact. She typed 2 words. Still driving. She hit send just as the elevator chimed its arrival. She stepped inside, before the heavy doors could slide shut. A shadow fell over the threshold. It was Chad, a newly minted, aggressively mediocre vice president who had coasted upward entirely on Marcus's coattails. "Hey, Yara," Chad said, slipping in, smelling strongly of expensive cologne. "Heard about the bonus adjustments. Rough break. But you know how it is. Budget tightening across the board. Hey, can you send me your detailed breakdown on the Apex account? By Friday, I need to present it to the board next week, and I haven't had time to look at the raw data." Yara looked at Chad. He was perfectly nice, perfectly groomed, and entirely incapable of doing the actual, grueling work required to maintain an account of that magnitude. "I'll make sure the transition files are fully updated for you, Chad," she said smoothly. Her phone buzzed in her hand. It was a reply from Elias Coffee. 6 a.m. tomorrow at the Roost. Bring your terms. There was no magical job offer waiting in the ether. No instant millionaire moment that solved all her problems instantly. Just an open door and a negotiation table. That was exactly what she wanted. She didn't want a handout. She wanted to carve out her worth on her own terms. The elevator reached the lobby. Yara stepped out into the bustling atrium of the Sterling building. She looked back at the towering glass structure one last time, knowing that when she returned tomorrow, it would only be to burn her bridges professionally, methodically, and legally. At exactly 6 the next morning, Yara sat across from Elias Vance in a quiet, upscale diner that catered to early rising executives. She didn't bring a standard resume. She brought a comprehensive 90-day structural roadmap for Vanguard's most troubled logistics division. She demanded a base salary 30% higher than what Marcus was paying her, a non-negotiable performance clause tied directly to her revenue generation without executive caps, and a title that gave her the undisputed authority to hire and fire her own team. Elias listened intently, reviewed her roadmap for 10 minutes in complete silence, and then extended his hand across the table. "Welcome to Vanguard," he said, his eyes gleaming with respect. "Give them your 2 weeks." When Yara handed her formal, professionally worded resignation letter to Marcus at 9 o'clock, his reaction was a masterclass in feigned indifference and corporate gaslighting. He barely glanced at the heavy stock paper. "Leaving so soon if this is a tantrum over the bonus pool? Yara, you're making a career-ending mistake. The market is ice cold for mid-level strategists right now. I appreciate the opportunity I've had here over the last 7 years. Marcus, I will spend the next 14 days ensuring a seamless transition," she replied, completely ignoring his bait. She absolutely refused to tell him where she was going, knowing it would drive him crazy. Marcus scoffed, immediately assigning Chad to take over her entire portfolio. "Make sure Chad has everything. We'll be fine without you." Over the next 2 weeks, Yara executed a handoff so surgical, so meticulously compliant, it was almost intimidating. She exhaustively documented every process, every client quirk, every backdoor contact she had cultivated over the years. She didn't delete a single file. She didn't forward a single email to her personal address. She strictly adhered to Sterling's complex security protocols, well aware that Marcus was the type of vindictive man to weaponize a minor IT infraction into a crippling lawsuit. Chad sat in on the lengthy transition meetings, nodding along, but fundamentally failing to grasp the deep nuance of the relationships. He asked surface-level questions, far more concerned with the color coding and formatting of the summary reports than the actual psychological profiles of the clients. Yara explained exactly how to handle the lead director at Apex Global. He absolutely needed a phone call before 9 on Tuesdays, before any bad news was delivered. Never an email. Chad casually wrote down that he should call Apex on Tuesday, on her final day, precisely at 5 o'clock. Yara handed her company laptop, phone, and ID badge to the HR director. She had wiped her personal data cleanly, leaving a pristine machine loaded with terabytes of institutional knowledge that nobody left in the building actually knew how to apply. As she walked out of the revolving doors for the final time, she felt a profound, overwhelming sense of lightness. She hadn't stolen anything. She hadn't actively sabotaged them. She had simply removed the one vital mechanism that made the machine function herself. Starting at Vanguard Consulting was not a cinematic montage of immediate, easy victories. When Yara walked onto the sprawling 50th floor on her very first Monday, she was met with polite but distinctly icy skepticism. Vanguard was a known shark tank in the industry. The team she was explicitly hired to lead, the Strategic Operations Group, was composed of Ivy League veterans who viewed her as an outsider, a mercenary brought in by Elias to disrupt their comfortable, highly paid ecosystem. Her first major career-defining test came within 72 hours. Vanguard was heavily struggling with a massive legacy client, Horizon Tech, who was aggressively threatening to jump ship to another agency due to consistent, catastrophic logistical failures. The internal team at Vanguard had prepared a slick 50-slide presentation full of meaningless buzzwords to pacify the angry client. Yara sat in the strategy review meeting, listening quietly as the lead analyst, a guy named Preston, confidently presented the deck. When he finished, the room waited for her obligatory approval. "Throw it out," Yara said, her voice cutting through the smug silence like a scalpel. Preston blinked, his face flushing red. "Excuse me, this took my team 2 weeks to build. The data is solid. And it will take Horizon exactly 2 minutes to see that it solves absolutely nothing," Yara replied, standing up and walking to the whiteboard. "You're offering them an optimization algorithm. Horizon doesn't have an algorithm problem. They have a massive supply chain bottleneck in their Seattle hub because their local director fundamentally hates their regional manager. We aren't going to pitch them software. We are going to pitch them a total restructuring of their human assets." She spent the next 3 exhaustive hours systematically dismantling their assumptions and rebuilding the strategy based on human psychology, political leverage, and raw operational data. Not flashy graphics. She didn't demand their respect. She demonstrated precisely why Elias had put her in charge. She worked alongside them until midnight, ordering food, diving deep into the pivot tables, and proving that she could outwork, outanalyze, and outthink anyone in the room. By the end of the week, when they presented the radically new strategy to Horizon Tech, the client didn't just stay. They expanded their contract by 20%. On the quiet ride back to the office, Preston, who had been her biggest, most vocal detractor, handed her a coffee and simply said it was a good call on the Seattle data, admitting he had completely missed the human element. Yara had secured her beachhead. She wasn't just Elias's controversial new hire anymore. She was Vanguard's undisputed apex predator, and she was just getting started. While Yara was rapidly solidifying her position and authority at Vanguard, the structural foundation at Sterling Partners was quietly beginning to rot from the inside out. It didn't happen overnight with a massive, dramatic explosion. It happened slowly, agonizingly, through a series of micro-failures that inevitably compounded into a full-blown crisis. Chad. armed with Yara's meticulous, step-by-step transition binders. Quickly realized that reading a manual on how to defuse a bomb is very, very different from actually defusing it while the timer ticks down. Apex Global, the absolute crown jewel of Sterling's portfolio, hit a minor, standard supply chain hiccup in Europe. According to Yara's explicit notes, Chad was supposed to call the lead director immediately, take extreme personal ownership of the issue, and offer a specific backdoor logistical fix before the market opened. Instead, Chad panicked, avoided the phone call, and sent a polished, defensively worded email at 11 in the morning on a Wednesday. The response from Apex was immediate, nuclear, and furious. The fragile relationship, which Yara had spent 8 grueling weeks carefully rehabilitating, fractured instantly. The client felt managed, ignored, and deeply disrespected. Chad panicked further and looped in Marcus. Marcus, relying heavily on his usual arrogant charm and aggressive negotiation tactics, attempted to smooth things over by taking the Apex executives to an incredibly expensive steakhouse. But expensive wine and charm couldn't fix a fundamentally broken supply chain. Over the next torturous month, Sterling began missing critical deadlines. Reports were delivered, late and full of errors. Forecasts were wildly inaccurate. The intricate web of cross-departmental coordination that Yara had maintained purely through personal capital and sheer willpower began to violently snap. Teams that Yara used to bridge started aggressively blaming each other in open meetings. Marcus sat in his corner office, staring at a digital dashboard that was increasingly flashing bright red. The revenue projections for the fourth quarter, which had looked spectacular when he ruthlessly cut Yara's bonus, were now in a terrifying freefall. Client satisfaction scores were plummeting across the board. He yelled at Chad. He fired a junior project manager to set an example. And he mandated punishing weekend work for the entire strategy division. Nothing worked. The carefully crafted illusion of Marcus's genius was evaporating. He had built his entire industry reputation on the back of Yara's invisible, uncredited labor, convincing himself and his board that the company's immense success was solely due to his overarching vision. Now, the vision was useless because the engine was entirely gone. The painful, undeniable truth began to circle the executive floor. Whispered in break rooms and closed-door meetings, they never should have let her go. Desperation inevitably breeds deep paranoia. As the Apex account teetered dangerously on the edge of total cancellation and 2 other major Tier 1 clients put Sterling on formal probation. Marcus desperately needed a scapegoat. He couldn't possibly admit to his ruthless board of directors that his petty decision to stiff a top performer out of a bonus had triggered a multi-million-dollar collapse. He needed a narrative that painted him as a victim of corporate espionage. He called an emergency. Highly classified meeting with the head of IT, the chief legal officer, and HR. Yara is actively sabotaging us, Marcus declared, pacing the length of his massive office like a caged animal. She went to Vanguard. Now Vanguard is poaching our proprietary methodologies. I want a full, forensic, scorched earth audit of her final 30 days. Every email, every file download, every USB drive she ever plugged into our network. Find the breach. I want to sue her into the Stone Age. The IT department spent 5 agonizing days tearing through Yara's digital footprint with a fine-tooth comb. They cross-referenced timestamps, analyzed server access logs, and reviewed deleted file caches using advanced recovery software. Legal aggressively prepared the cease and desist templates, ready to launch a massive corporate espionage lawsuit that would destroy her career. On Friday afternoon, the head of IT and the chief legal officer sat down heavily in Marcus's office. They looked intensely uncomfortable, avoiding his gaze. "Well," Marcus demanded, slamming his hands on the desk. "What did she take? Give me the evidence." The head of IT cleared his throat nervously. "Nothing, Marcus. She took absolutely nothing. In fact, her digital hygiene was flawless. She didn't forward a single email to a personal account. She didn't download any client lists. The only thing she did in her last 2 weeks was create extensive, highly detailed transition manuals and save them directly to the public company server for Chad. That's literally impossible, Marcus snapped, his face reddening. Look harder. She must have hidden it on a cloud drive. Marcus, the legal officer interjected smoothly, his tone laced with warning. We looked everywhere. If we go to a judge with this, we'll be laughed out of court and immediately hit with a devastating defamation countersuit. She left this place cleaner than any departing executive in company history. Marcus sank into his chair, the terrifying reality settling over him like a suffocating, heavy blanket. Yara hadn't needed to steal Sterling's secrets because she was the secret. She didn't take the blueprints. She was the architect. Vanguard wasn't winning because they had Sterling's stolen data. They were winning because they had Yara's brilliant mind. And Marcus had arrogantly given her away for a fraction of what she was genuinely worth. Exactly 3 months after Yara's departure, the inevitable corporate nightmare happened. Apex Global formally announced a competitive review of their account. They were opening their massive contract Sterling's absolute lifeblood up for outside bids. It was a humiliating, public blow for Marcus, signaling to the entire industry market that Sterling was rapidly bleeding out. Across the city at Vanguard's sleek headquarters, Elias called Yara into his office. He dropped the massive 200-page Apex proposal request binder onto his desk with a heavy thud. They're actively looking for a new home, Elias said, watching her carefully, gauging her reaction. I know your extensive history with them. I know you personally built that account. I also know there might be serious bad blood. Do you want me to assign another director to lead the pitch so you aren't conflicted? Yara looked at the binder. There was absolutely no bad blood with the client, only with Marcus. She knew Apex complex infrastructure better than their own board members did. No, Yara said firmly, her eyes locked on Elias. I want to lead it, but I want to build the entire pitch from scratch, based strictly and only on the data they provided in this request. I won't use a single piece of proprietary knowledge from Sterling. We win this clean, purely on merit. Elias smiled broadly, leaning back in his chair, deeply impressed. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. You have full control. Yara, build your team. Go get them. For the next 2 grueling weeks, Yara completely transformed the Vanguard war room into a command center. She didn't rely on her past relationship with Apex to coast. She meticulously analyzed their new data, identified a massive, structural shift in the European logistics market that Apex had completely missed, and built a dynamic, future-proof strategy that addressed severe problems they didn't even know they had yet. Meanwhile, back at Sterling, it was pure, unadulterated chaos. Marcus took personal, frantic control of the pitch, screaming at graphic designers to make the slide deck flashier. Yashin, demanding that Chad aggressively manipulate the financial projections to look more optimistic than reality allowed. Marcus was relying entirely on the sunk cost fallacy, hoping against hope that Apex would stay simply because leaving was too much of an administrative hassle. He didn't understand the assignment. He was frantically trying to sell a shiny new coat of paint for a house whose foundation was visibly cracking. The stage was finally set. The 2 rival firms were the final contenders. It would all be decided in a single high-stakes boardroom meeting. The Apex Global Executive Boardroom was a sprawling, intimidating glass fortress overlooking the city. When Marcus walked in with his entourage, Chad, and 3 senior vice presidents, he completely froze in his tracks. Sitting calmly, professionally on the other side of the massive oak table, flanked by a lean, sharp team of Vanguard analysts, was Yara. She wore a sharp, impeccably tailored navy suit. She didn't look smug. She looked utterly focused and completely in her element. She caught Marcus's panicked eye and gave a slight, deeply professional nod. Marcus's jaw tightened so hard his teeth ground together. Sterling presented first. Marcus took the floor, desperately utilizing all his theatrical charisma. He clicked rapidly through 50 slides of aggressive growth projections. Promising, the moon and the stars, heavily using buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and historical partnership. When the Apex executives asked pointed, highly technical questions about the recent logistical failures, Marcus deflected smoothly, vaguely blaming transitional market friction and promising that things were back on track. It was a performance entirely lacking substance. Then, it was Vanguard's turn. Yara stood up smoothly. She didn't dim the lights or rely on heavily animated, distracting slides. She pulled up a single, highly detailed, beautifully mapped supply chain schematic. You aren't here to buy empty promises, so I won't insult you by selling you any, Yara began, her voice projecting quiet, absolute authority. Over the last quarter, you've experienced a devastating 12% delay in European routing. Sterling's model blames market friction. The raw data tells a very different story. For 45 uninterrupted minutes, Yara delivered an absolute masterclass. She systematically dismantled the core inefficiency in their current structure and laid out Vanguard's elegant solution, a solution that was hyper-realistic, incredibly cost-effective, and backed by undeniable, bulletproof math. When a highly skeptical Apex board member challenged her aggressively on the tight implementation timeline, Yara didn't flinch. She provided the exact micro steps Vanguard would take, taking full, unwavering personal accountability for the execution, true accountability. Yara said, looking directly and intensely at the Apex CEO, must always belong to a person who is empowered to fix the problem, not a corporate logo that hides behind endless bureaucracy. Marcus, sitting just feet away in a cold sweat, felt the blood completely drain from his face. She wasn't just pitching the client, she was surgically, publicly exposing every single flaw in Marcus's toxic leadership style. When the brutal meeting concluded, the Apex CEO stood up, bypassed Marcus entirely as if he didn't exist, and firmly shook Yara's hand, telling her it was a brilliant presentation and that it was incredibly good to hear her voice again. Marcus knew, in his gut, before he even reached the elevator, that he had lost the account entirely. The catastrophic loss of the Apex contract sent a violent shockwave through every floor of Sterling Partners. The board of directors, usually perfectly content to let Marcus operate in the shadows as long as the stock price held steady, summoned him immediately for an emergency tribunal. The chairman of the board, an unforgiving, terrifying private equity veteran named Harrison, demanded the unfiltered numbers. When the terrified CFO presented the grim financial autopsy, the truth was glaring and inescapable. The company had lost 25% of its entire revenue stream in a single afternoon, and 2 more major clients were actively threatening to leave. Why exactly did Yara leave? Harrison asked, his voice deceptively soft, the kind of quiet that precedes a hurricane. Marcus tried desperately to spin it, sweating through his expensive shirt. She was aggressively poached by Vanguard. It was a purely mercenary move. We simply couldn't compete with the astronomical numbers Elias Vance was throwing at her. It was out of my hands. The HR director, Sarah, sensing the shifting winds and deciding instantly to save her own career, pulled out a thick file. Actually, Harrison, that's not true. Yara left immediately following the 3rd quarter compensation review. Marcus unilaterally utilized executive discretion to cut her rightfully earned bonus by 60% in order to inflate the executive pool. Vanguard's base offer was barely above what she should have earned here if her bonus had simply been paid as contracted. The entire boardroom went dead, horrifyingly silent. Harrison stared intently at Marcus, a vein pulsing in his temple. You risked a quarter of our total corporate revenue to save a few $100,000. You alienated the sole architect of our biggest account out of sheer, unadulterated arrogance, Marcus stammered. his polished, untouchable veneer utterly shattering into pieces. She was just a mid-level strategist. She was replaceable. I thought we could manage. You didn't think at all, Harrison interrupted coldly, standing up. You gambled with our money to feed your massive ego, desperate to save his career and his reputation. Marcus played his absolute last card. I can get her back. I know how she operates better than anyone. If I offer her a vice president title and double her salary right now, she'll return. Everyone has a price. Harrison, let me fix this. Harrison looked at him with profound disgust. You have exactly 1 week to fix this, Marcus. If you don't bring her back, or instantly replace that revenue, pack your office. The very next day, Yara received a frantic text from Marcus, asking for coffee at 2 o'clock, promising a blank check and begging her to talk. Yara looked at her phone from her spacious, sunlit corner office at Vanguard. She didn't need to go. She had already fundamentally won. But a small part of her, the part that had endured 7 years of his relentless condescension and gaslighting, wanted to look him in the eye one last time to watch him beg. She typed back that she would give him exactly 10 minutes. The coffee shop was noisy and chaotic, a stark, grounding contrast to the sterile, intimidating quiet of the corporate boardrooms they were both used to. Yara arrived exactly on time, ordering a simple black coffee and sitting across from Marcus. He looked utterly exhausted. The arrogant posture was completely gone, replaced by the nervous, twitchy energy of a cornered animal realizing the trap had sprung. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. He slid a thick, legally binding folder across the table. Executive Vice President of Strategy, a base salary of $500,000. A guaranteed, contractually protected bonus structure that I cannot touch. Complete, unquestioned autonomy over your team and budget. Come back, Yara. We will build the entire division around you. Yara didn't even open the folder. She looked at Marcus, deeply studying the pure desperation swimming in his eyes. He still didn't get it. He truly thought money could erase years of disrespect. He thought a fancy title could magically overwrite the fact that he fundamentally viewed her as a tool to be used, not a brilliant partner to be respected. You don't want me back, Marcus, Yara said softly, her voice filled with absolute certainty. You want the Apex account back. You want Harrison to stop breathing down your neck. You want me to save you from yourself. I made a massive miscalculation, Marcus pleaded, leaning in close, his voice cracking slightly. I admit that to you. I severely underestimated your value to the firm. I'm trying to make it right. This is generational wealth, Yara. You can write your own ticket, whatever you want. I already did, Yara replied, her voice perfectly steady and resolute. When you arrogantly cut my bonus, you didn't just take my money. You showed me exactly what the ceiling was at Sterling. Elias Vance didn't just give me a paycheck. He gave me a seat at the table where the actual decisions are made. He respects my brain, not just my output. She pushed the folder back across the table. It stopped mere inches from Marcus's shaking hands. I'm not coming back. Marcus, you told me to my face that I was replaceable. Now you get to prove it to your board. Yara stood up, dropped a crisp $5 bill on the table to cover her coffee, and walked out of the shop into the crisp city air. She didn't look back once. A week later, the major industry news outlets reported a massive leadership shakeup at Sterling Partners. Marcus was aggressively forced to step down as CEO, quietly and humiliatingly transitioned into an irrelevant advisory role by the furious board. Sterling spent the next grueling year bleeding top talent and scrambling desperately to regain its footing in a market that had rapidly moved on without them. Yara, meanwhile, sat comfortably in the war room at Vanguard Consulting. She was reviewing the stellar first quarter projections with her dedicated team, She wasn't just executing someone else's flawed vision anymore. She was the undisputed architect of her own empire. When the meeting wrapped up, her assistant knocked gently on the glass door to ask if she was available for the executive board vote that afternoon. Yara smiled genuinely. Closing her laptop and told him she would be right there, she walked out onto the bustling floor, the undisputed master of her own worth, leaving the ghosts of Sterling far behind in the dust.